So I'm just about to share this image from one of the islands in Venice. I've forgotten which one it is. And it's not actually one I stop off at. It's when I go past. But hopefully you can see both of those now side by side, those screens. And because Zoom has now given us this interactive element, you can pinch any of those screens, make them bigger, and close them down a little bit if you need to, okay? So how do we begin this scene? Well, think about it. If you have a knitting needle or your paintbrush handle, that will be very useful because it will allow you to put, we can see the horizon today. It'll allow you to put your horizon line in, which is roughly halfway down on the horizontal plane. Okay, now I know that you can't see the horizon through the buildings, but I just put it in place because it does help. Now, once you have your horizon line in, then we build from there. Now, it doesn't matter if you build the sky area first or the water area, it doesn't really matter. But because this one, this picture, the resource, has such a strong diagonal running through here, I'm going to put that one in first because it will really simplify how we're going to see this. So we take our knitting needle, and probably don't need to say this, but I will anyway. Give yourself a little bit of a margin here because you notice that there's like a little, well, it's one of those sort of lights, so a little in Venice, you have out in the lagoon, you have these, they're kind of like lighthouses. They do have a little light on them, but they're just made out of a couple of wooden poles bashed into the lagoon. And the lagoon's not very deep. The Adriatic itself is no deeper than 8 meters, pretty much. It's a very shallow sea. And so these posts don't go down too deep. They're probably about 5 or 6 meters down under the water there. And it's to stop these vaporettos getting caught on the sandbanks because obviously the tides move the sand around and it can cause problems navigating. So we have this little beacon here, which this knitting needle is going to point to. So if you can find a very similar angle to what you're seeing, which I would say 16, it's not really 17 minutes past the hour. That would be a good place to start, 16 or 17 minutes past the hour. Like so. And believe it or not, it doesn't get much more difficult than that. So that's good to know. Right, so you can see that's my attempt at where the red line is. So I'm going to give you another line now, which will also challenge our perspective skills. Notice where we have the pathway leading from, well, this is where the boat would dock, and we've just pulled off again. I think it's called either Mazzano or something like that. Anyway, I will find out for you and send that on because I know some of you will probably be exhibiting these works, so you'll need to know where this is. Or Mazzorbo, that's it, it's Mazzorbo. I think that's what it is, it's Mazzorbo, but I'll just double check later. So Mazzorbo, M-A-Z-O-R-B-O, Mazzorbo. I think that's how it's spelled, could be double Z. But anyway, so I put that second line, which is from the walkway to the fence that you see. And if that was 1/4 and that's 16 minutes past, and I'm kind of linking it to that beacon there as my vanishing point, interestingly enough. So if you could just tilt this somewhere between 15 minutes and 16, if that's okay with you, use that little beacon as your center point, like, you know, on a wheel, on a bicycle, this would be like a spoke going from the center out. Okay, I'm just trying to think of ways to make it easier to understand, and of course, hopefully I don't complicate things. So that's pretty good. We've got quite a bit of the more difficult areas sorted already, and that's a trick. That's what I use every time I go out. Now what I want to do is think about the next big objects within the scene. So from perspective, I go to shapes. And I know that maybe this is a big shape. Yeah, that's a big shape. This part of the, whether it's a house or a part of the church buildings, I'm not sure. That's a big shape, but I think I'm going for this shape first, and I'll explain why as soon as I've got the first rectangle created. So this rectangle, now on these islands, everything leans and tilts a little bit because, well, you know, Venice is, it moves a little bit, you know, because all of these are man-made islands. They're sort of made with those beams, and they backfill it with stones and rubble, and then they pack it down, and then they build up. And of course, the waves hitting it over time, the wind and everything moves a little bit. So it's probably better not that you should try to get this dead straight. I would say to you, it's whatever your first attempt is at drawing this rectangle, stick with it, because it does lean a little bit. So where is this spatially? Well, if this is the halfway point, so now we have to think about proportion. So I'm just going to put a line through the center vertically of the picture plane. Remember, we've already got the horizon line, which is about there. So that should give you a little bit of a heads up onto where you should put that church tower. And I would say to you that it doesn't matter if you're a little bit in or out, honestly, because you've got trees behind it, and trees are just perfect camouflage for any error. So it's a confidence builder, this one, for sure. So if I look at this quadrant separately, and I think about how much that church tower intrudes, well, I think it's somewhere on the sort of left-hand side of the quadrant. It's quite close to the line, but not touching. So it's give a small gap and then build your church tower up like a rectangle as such. It's going to go quite close to the top of your page. Now I use a bit of masking tape to hold my paper down. It gives me a lovely border as well. So I give a little bit of breathing space for the triangle, the hat of the church, if you like, the little steeple. It's going to sit on the top like so. And I'm not far off with how I'm going to treat that church. It's going to be something like that. Okay, so it doesn't have to be too complicated. And then I move on. So I hope that is explanatory enough for now, because we're going to move on to the next big shape. So the next big shape, of course, is that building. Now that's quite a tricky building because you're seeing it in perspective and you're seeing it side on. So when that occurs, we should really think about Paul Cézanne again. And you're probably thinking, oh, not Paul Cézanne again. Yeah, but he does help us, because he would say, treat it as a box, because that's what it mainly is. He would say everything in nature is either a square, circle, or a triangle. So start with that box there. Give yourself a little bit of space between the church tower and the, I believe it's a church building. There we go. Like so, there's a little gap. And then if this is my quadrant, like my quarter here, then it's about halfway up of that quadrant. Or if you want to take it as 3/4 of the way up the page, another way of seeing it, of course, it doesn't matter because it's all about proportions at this point. And if we can get the proportions close, then our picture will look better. There we are. So hopefully that makes sense so far. Now, once you've got that square, as I have now, I just nibble off a little bit on the corner there. So now I swap from Cézanne to Matisse. Imagine Matisse with his scissors cutting across. And what's the angle on that cut that Matisse is making? Well, it's about 10 or 11 minutes past the hour. See that? As easy as that, which is good. Now, the next part, we unfortunately do need to go into perspective. And for some reason, this is a stumbling block for many people. So I am going to clear the drawings. Think they've gone. And I'm going to draw for you the perspective from that is my vanishing point there on the horizon. Now, in perspective, linear perspective is what we're dealing with. Everything in linear perspective can be simplified to either single point, 2-point, or even indeed 3-point perspective. Today, we are very fortunate because we only really need to think about single point perspective. So we already have one of the lines of this building, which is where it meets on the ground, or maybe like the foundation, if you like. So that's going to be a line that's projected. Now, these lines are conceptual, so please don't look for them when you're out in nature. They may not even be there if you're in a hill town or something, but you can use this as a guide. You can use your pencil or your knitting needle or your paintbrush to kind of conceptualize where it would be, because we can see the bottom of the building where it sits on the floor. So that's the clue. You get the angle for that. You point it to your point here, and then I'm going to rotate this up to that point there. Remember, Matisse gave us this spot here. Now, if I can put this knitting needle in line with Matisse's spot there, it should give me this spot here. How does it do that? Well, because if I take another linear perspective line now from the same point, I bring it out. Remember, my mouse is pretty dreadful for drawing with, so please excuse the shakiness. But you can see that I'm attempting to get those lines to line up. There it is. And that's what I'm talking about. So I now know that if I can get this line here in line with my knitting needle, I will find my spot here for the other side of the building's wall plate. Now, the wall plate is where the roof sits and leans. Very important to the builder. It's also quite important to the artist because it gives us our tills. So it's going to be somewhere along there. Now, how do you find it, where that's going to be? Well, you can either use that there to guide you, which I just did. I just cheated. I just took from there to there. It's still in that line. See? And now I'm ready to put my roof on. Now, if any of that was a bit confusing, don't worry. I always say, oh, Philip's here. What I always say is, I always repeat these methods, and if it doesn't drop the first time, the penny that is, it will the next time, perhaps. And if not, then all you need to do is draw what you see. Draw what you see. So I'm just going to now show you. I clear these off now. The problem is, you see, if we try and draw that church from the side, we will likely put these two spots in line with each other. But do you notice they're on a tilt from there to there? And that's because this building, we're seeing it from the side, we're seeing a side view of it, and this side is going away from us to the left. When that happens, the tilt will tilt down to the left. Always with linear perspective, that causes students issues. But you can see that yellow line I've just drawn. It's literally 14 minutes past the hour. So if you're really stuck and you can't fathom at all what I'm talking about, although you can see it, but it doesn't make sense, then just give yourself a 14 minutes past the hour guide to that point there. And then, funnily enough, we can probably take a straight line back there. But if we look at the roof, notice the tilt. It's tilting away from us, this time down to the right. How dare it do that? It's confusing because this is tilting down to the left and this is turning down to the right. Why is it doing that? Well, because linear perspective, as I mentioned, falls into three categories, but two for this building. We have the front plane, which follows the lines going off to the left. And this side of the building, i.e. the other side, goes off away from us to the right. So that's all we need to know. I know it confuses some. We're all different types of learner. It doesn't mean to say that you're not capable of drawing it or anything like that. It's like, you know, you've got kinesthetic learners, oral, conceptual, linguistic. Some people see it with the picture. Some people just don't see it with the math idea. Some people only see it with the math idea. And all of them are equally as clever and difficult, but hopefully one method will work for you. Anyway, once you've got that corner there on your building, you can put another line down because now you've got a three-dimensional building just like that. And that's what linear perspective can give us. It can give us something that looks like a building, sometimes, hopefully, and other times it can give us a headache. Hopefully on this one, it's a nice introduction for you. Right. So where to next? Well, we've got our church tower. We've got the church building or part of it. We can now start to think about the tree shapes. They're the big things which are going on. So that's an element which is natural. And because it's a natural ordered thing, it grows, well, of course, they've been pruned back a little bit, pollarded, but we've got two trees here, which are, or two or three trees here, groups of trees, which are those umbrella pines. And they're lovely shapes. They look great in a watercolor, any painting really, they're just wonderful. So how do we know where they are? Well, treat them as circles, if you like. There's one circle. Or ovals, oval shapes, like clouds. That's a good way of seeing it. This is my horizon line. So we know where that is on the screen. You can see it. So it's got to be above the horizon line for sure. And it's got to have a little bit of a gap between the buoy or this post thing. So I'm going to draw two rounded, like rustic loaves of bread. There they are. One, two. They're like Venn diagrams. So there they are, two there. I've given a little bit of a gap between the church and these. So my scale, I'm thinking of the scale. Once you've got a basic idea of the shape that you like for your trees there, then we have to think about the other trees. So the other trees, I'm going to use green this time. I'm going to simplify it as one big group there. I have no idea what species of tree they are, but I just treat them as an abstract shape. And this one goes behind the church over here. Notice their depths and luminosity. That's interesting, isn't it? Because these umbrella pines, they're very dark against the contrast of the sky. This group here, though, which more like a hedgehog shape, is a little bit lighter. And then last but not least, over here, we have the group of trees that goes behind the church, is overlapped by the tower, comes back. Remember, you've got to follow with your eye, your mind's eye, through to here. There we go. And then finally, another little curve. Look at the wall plate you put there. It's a little bit higher as it sort of goes behind and is overlapped by the building. That wasn't too difficult, was it? Hopefully you've managed your trees. So I know that some of my proportions are a bit generous for, say, this group. Maybe not big enough for others, but as long as I understand where I am in the painting, it's going to work. So give yourself a little bit of time to shape your trees, maybe to a better sort of proportion. That's the important thing. You're getting your proportions, and then we can move on. So in the initial stage of your sketch, what you should really consider to make time utilize more logically is to think exactly along the lines of, I've got my background, my middle ground, and the foreground. Now with this one, foreground's always attached to detail, so that will come later. But for my background shapes now, I think they're okay, they will work. I might need a little bit more detail in the church for sure, on the steeple and the bell tower, and on the building I'd like to put the window and the doors. How much detail do you need? Well, I always say, and this is just my sort of guidance on this, but if you can draw it in paint, you don't need to draw it in pencil. So, but if it's not a very complicated scene, and I'm not going to say that this isn't without some complexities, of course it is, but it is, you'll see, it's pretty straightforward once we get painting. You could leave those branches and the trunks of the trees for later. You could just paint one or draw one or two. You can paint the three or four later. But you will need to probably draw the posts that are in front of the jetty, because if you don't, you might run into problems when you're painting. So yeah, I will draw those out, and they will be details, foreground details, and they sort of go off into the background as well. So I always really think about the basic shapes and then gradually build detail onto it. And then I think in terms of, can I paint that, or do I need to draw it before I paint it? And if you feel that you need to draw it before you paint it, then do so. That's the rule. If it makes you confident, then do so. Okay, right. So I hope that makes sense. And I'm going to now put this wall. There is a wall which also obeys linear perspective. And this time it leads all the way to the church there. And it almost appears that that line continues. I like how the planners have incorporated the brickwork of the church. They've separated the stucco at the same level, which is great on the eye, isn't it? So for watercolorists, that's a blessing. And so I need to get that wall line going through to there. But before I can do that, I need to know that this part of the jetty, as it goes off at the end of the island, leads to the wall. And you can kind of see, if I clear off all of the lines pretty much now, you can see here that as this jetty ends, you get a little bank coming up before the wall emerges, and then you get your tilt going all the way back. What do you think? 14 minutes past the hour? Not quite, is it? It's almost quarter past, but not quite, somewhere in between. So with that in mind, you know that the little wall here is taller than the horizon line. There's my horizon line. It's a little bit higher. And if I casually look to the left and see that little buoy there, that little bollard thing, that's about the same height. So I just make it similar height to that. And then I've got my starting point with my knitting needle to draw my line coming back to the church building. And that's exactly how I operate when I'm out and about, just to get things done quickly. And although it's not photographically accurate, it'll work in the watercolor. As you know, if you try and draw it as a photograph in watercolor, it just doesn't look right. It looks overworked. But a casual sketch like this, based on these principles, perspective, proportion, and placement, they don't have to be bulletproof. They just have to be generally correct, and you're going to be finding your watercolors succeed. Okay. So hope that's helped you. And of course, always trust your eye over any mechanical device. If your knitting needle makes it look a bit too high, just like mine did, I bring it down. And now I feel that's better. Right, so where to next? Well, what I'm going to suggest we do is I will draw out all of the general shapes first today, and then I'm going to check with you, see how you're doing. Once we've got everybody to the general level, then we'll go into detail. Once we've got the detail, which doesn't need to be a lot, to be honest, then we go into paint. All right. We'll probably have a little break halfway, so that some can catch up, maybe you can get a cup of tea before we go into paint. So we'll have all the drawing first, and then we'll go into painting. I'll just check the chat, something has come in. Okay, Philip, thank you very much for that message. Received and understood. Been there myself. Right, we are now moving on to what's going on. We've done the air. We've got a lot of the buildings and trees that are against the air. I always like to think about watercolors as the elements. So now we go to water and, of course, the earth, where it meets. So now we have a bit of a different angle, because linear perspective can go above the horizon and also below the horizon. So now everything is going the other way, because anything that is structured or built, or indeed maybe even grows visually below our eye level, then it's going to operate in the opposite angle. So it's going to tilt upwards to that bollard this time. So this bit here, where the walkway, the jetty, whatever that is, this part meets a little bit closer to us. This bit's a bit further away. And why is that? Well, look here. If you look at the jetty and study it by eye, you'll see that it curves on the walkway here and goes around there, and then it joins there somehow, just there. It's a bit tricky to see, but there's a curve there. So I'll do that again. There's a little curve. Looks like there's some tables and chairs there as well, so you can't really see, but it curves to there before it goes off again here. So with that in mind, we have to make sure that we allow for that. Otherwise, we won't get this looking as it should be. So does this actually follow all the way up to the buoy? It might veer off slightly to the side of it, but it is going off very close. It's going off slightly to the side. Why is that? Well, because the island itself is not like the building. It's not built on a straight line with a plumb line and things like that and a level. It's actually built where the land is, or where the water has a higher bank, and they just backfilled there. So it's organic. So you can use the principles a little bit. They did make the jetty straight, but it doesn't necessarily point to that point all the time, as you just saw. So we now have to rely on the knitting needle. Well, that's okay. It's good enough. And we're going to bring this line, therefore, sort of tilting up that way somewhat. There we are. And I'm going to give it an angle this time. It's not far off 16 again. Do you notice, though, how far that line goes? It goes to here. That's where it stops, that first part of the jetty. That's halfway. It's halfway. So that's good. We know where that is. We can find that. Just check that it's also that tree there, where the third tree along. That's nice to find. Everything then starts to add up and you feel more confident. So that's where the first jetty goes to. And then, of course, the second jetty is a little bit higher up and comes out from there as well. So if I clear everything off, I can now see that this jetty goes down to there. Something like that. Nope, too steep. Too steep, I think it is. So you'll get an idea when you're doing it if it's too steep or not. It's probably better now. Feels a bit better. Okay, and then we need to then look at this point here. So we've got this line, which is probably part of the reflection as well, to be fair. And then we've got this line here, which is where on top of the brick wall, which is the jetty, they have a capping stone, which is a lighter stone, which is very nice. But you can see that that rectangle, which it is, pretty much parallel. It's the same height. Pretty much. Then we have this small curve here. But notice that the shadowy line of the furthest jetty goes off to there. And it's almost in line with the capping stone on this one. So that's a detail, but sometimes adding a detail which can help our mind's eye is a good thing. So at least I can fit my capping stone. This is a little bit higher than that, and I'm happy. Good, that's great. Then we have to look for this line. which is, of course, the top of the capping stone on the other jetty, which leads to the curve. So let's just put the little curve in. Why not? Wouldn't hurt a little curve. There it is. It's not much of a curve, but it makes sense, because if you leave out a little detail like that, may not be a drastic problem, but it might cause a bit of confusion in the middle of the picture there. So now I just draw that line to the curve, and suddenly all is good in the watercolor. Yet again. So this is quite a nice one, because not only is it going to give us a really lovely, gentle baptism into twilight nocturnal paintings, which I hope we can do more of, with sunsets, which can be very dramatic in a watercolor. This one's a gentle introduction. It's not too difficult with the sun. We don't have to paint the sun even, just a feeling of it. And this is something that is really important in watercolors, is to create a feeling of the atmosphere and the mood, which we've already done when we did the Indian temple. That was full of very dramatic, prismatic color with dusty atmosphere. This one is a totally different painting. It's very sleepy, gentle, and relaxing. And that's something because of the time of the day. It's a very special time of the day, which I'm going to sort of do a little diagram about, because it's kind of important in a way. When we look at the, there's the Earth. When the sun goes down, so that there's the horizon. There's the horizon, that's a better way of saying it. While the sun's up here, or above the horizon, we've got a very bright sky. But as it starts to get lower, say to here at golden hour, an hour or so before the sundown, we psychologically start to relax. In Italy, they have a great custom. You'll have an aperitivi, which really does relax you, but it is because it's the end of the day and they want to relax. Now, for a very brief period when it's here, you can still see color, but it is starting to get into gray tones. But you'll probably see golden tones in the light as well. It's called the golden hour. But as soon as the sun goes below the horizon, i.e. down here, what will happen is we get a glow in the sky. And this is called twilight, as you know. And that really starts to make us, depending on what you're painting, of course, if it's a tranquil scene like this, it's very relaxing. It makes us feel at ease. So these nocturnal paintings, when we think of nocturnes, you always think of the great American artist Whistler, James McNeill Whistler, and he sort of mastered this idea of using grey, but color note greys, to give a psychological, hypnotic almost feeling through his painting. Now, he's known for his oil paintings, but this is something that you can use in your watercolors as well. So that's why I'm guiding us into nocturnes gently, because there is something else to gain from it, which I'll mention later, okay, if I remember. But it's very important that we start to just think about the atmosphere and mood. And we're very lucky that, you know, poor James McNeill Whistler had a terrible time of it, because you know, it was not so common back in the period of the 1870s or whatever to have a camera to run around and take pictures like we do today. We can take photographs and we can enjoy, or, you know, getting it onto our computer and seeing it pretty much in the same day. So we can work from photographs. If you're a plein air artist painting like McNeill Whistler was probably doing, you're going to be up against the time restraint. You have so little time to capture this mood. There you go. So anyway, that should have given you time, hopefully, to get to this point. Now, if you've got to this point, we can now start to go into details. So what are we looking at? Well, I'm going to erase the bottom part of the church because the wall goes in front of it, the tower, sorry. So that goes. There is this doorway on the front of the building here. I'm just going to make life a lot easier because we can just make a little rectangle, but keep the top of the lintel in line with the wall. And then you've got this arched window above it. So do your best with that semicircular shape. That should work. It probably leans a little bit more to the left than the right because it's going away from us to the left. So that helps. There's a couple of little funny windows up there. That's up to you. I'll leave that for you to decide if you want to put those in. But there are some windows down here which are larger, seem to have more impact on the story. So I put those in. And these sort of windows, when they have this sort of symmetry to them, this kind of tells you it's more likely to be a church building or something like that. And then I'm ready to move on. Where would I move on to next? Well, I think the bell tower seems to be pretty important. So here's a few things about that. Right, church towers tend to have lots of detail. And we can split this detail. We've already got the triangle at the top of the church, but notice your angle here. I've got a horizontal line and it's not horizontal, it's tilting away to the right. So I'm going to make that known in the drawing because it will have a bearing. On ornate buildings such as church towers, you tend to find, especially old places like Italy, wherever in Europe really, you're going to find these little things pushing out at the side, little, I don't know what you'd call them really, but capping stone type things. Notice that. And then the space that I've got here below the spire is about the same height as the spire. It's very close. So I'm going to put that in. Maybe my spire is a bit short, I don't know, but I'll go with that because I don't want to change anything too much. But notice down here, this little architectural detail that sticks out is more, you see that? It's slightly triangular there. Same on this side. All three of those are the same because you're only seeing the sides of them. So they sort of peep out like little wedges. But this is more like a little triangle. And once I've got that sort of in the drawing, I can go upwards a little bit. And I notice the same thing is happening again, perhaps 2/3 of the way up of this little rectangle area, 2/3 of the way up. That's my basic proportion, I'm thinking. And another little triangle on the left and another little ledge on the right. Good. Made it easy, didn't it? And that wasn't too tricky. Once you've got those in place, then you would automatically want to get the bell, the arches for the bell tower. Don't think we can see the bells actually in this one, which is a bonus, makes it easier. So I've got this little arch window shape, two of them, kind of like little owl eyes. So I clear those out into here. And that's going to make painting that a lot easier. So there they are. That's good. How much more detail do you need? That's it. I think you would not need any more detail than that. You might start to see that at the top here, there is maybe an octagonal aspect to it, you know, but I don't think it's that necessary unless you really want to put it in. I'll leave that up to you. Right, so we're very close indeed, but there are some details such as these posts, which we will need to put in. But before I put those posts in, let's just look at the lightest point on the walkway. And you notice there's like a hockey stick lying down here. Not a literal hockey stick, but kind of goes off. And it's that capping stone. It is, it's very white, like a travertine or something. A lovely bit of stone there, which is reflecting more light than anything else. So I'm just going to draw that in because then I can create the feeling of depth. This will come right forward because of that, and everything else will go back. So I want to draw that in first of all, and you'll notice it's also carrying on. You can even see it on the far bank. So I'll put that in as well. And hopefully I can retain its shape as I add the paint and reserve the light. Then it's time definitely to sharpen your pencil because you're going to need a sharp pencil for the next area. Now, there are many posts. There's 1, 2, these two are going the same way, so that's good. 5, now that's 5 there. There's 6 I can see. Do you need to do all 6? No, not necessarily, but there's 4 I can see here. 1, 2, 3. I think I'll do all 4 of those, that's for sure. I like this grouping here where you've got one overlapping the other. That always works well. Overlaps are interesting because our eyes are just brought to it because it's a confusion and we want to see what it is. And I like this one that sort of comes out in front of them. So whether you want to draw all of those posts or not, that's entirely up to you. If it's 3 or 4, doesn't really matter. When you've got so many like this, it might matter. So in terms of it takes too long if you're out painting in the scene, but purists would paint them all in perhaps. I'll put the 4 that I can see. I'm also using those pink lines that I've put. You can see where it corresponds to the church here. And this one corresponds to the corner here. So it really helps me to understand, look, I'm going to space that one there, and I'm going to space this one there. The tilts on these are very gentle, 2 minutes past the hour, sometimes 1 or 2 are at 12 o'clock. They can go anyway, really, as long as they don't, you know, they're not lying over. That looks a bit odd, but it would look a bit odd. But there you go, there's 4 posts there. Now, when you've done a line like that on one side, just draw the other side and give it a thickness that you can paint around or paint onto. And I make them all pretty much the same, just to keep it unified. But when I go away to these further points, so these are the foreground ones and these are sort of middle ground. In the middle ground, of course, as I was trying to suggest, you don't have to do them all unless you really want to. It's absolutely fine. But I'm going to do maybe 5 like so. That looks good. They're a bit smaller, not as tall, and they should also not be as wide for the obvious reasons, because they're going away from us. So once you've got a grip on that, they should work. Like so. And as I mentioned, I kind of like this one with the overlap. Just something about overlapping things, which if I bring them in, especially if you can put a nice little gap between them in places as well, a little gap there, that just looks great. It gives you more depth. And so now I just use my pencil eraser, which is the best tool for this, to erase anything that's shouldn't be on my post. Better to do it. If you've got a really good memory, which I don't, dreadful memory. So what I tend to do is I erase everything that, you know, would confuse me when I'm painting. So all of my posts, as you just saw, they've all been cleaned so that they can work without causing me too much to think about. And then I just look to see, is there anything else that I need as a detail? Now, of course, there could be. So I'm going to wait a moment though, because I know that you're busy likely drawing these posts in. So I'll give it a moment there. But if you did get that far and you're already drawing out your posts, it wouldn't be a bad idea to draw some of the clutter that you can see here. If I zoom in, which hopefully it'll allow me to do, there you go. You can see what this is. It's a lovely little area where you could have sit and wait, maybe have a drink. And it's got one of those umbrella things. I don't really like those umbrella things when they're not actually doing anything. When they're up and, you know, in their place, they look great. But I'll leave that for you to decide if you're going to put that in. I think I'll put some chairs in there. I kind of like the look of them. They look like little boxes. So a couple of little chair shapes. Notice that they have some rim light on them. So how do you deal with that? Well, my advice when we come to paint that will be paint around them, not into them, for the first part of the wash, and then later we just fill them in with a similar but probably a different temperature tone. You'll see. So I've got 4 little box chairs and what looks like a little coffee table, drinks table there. Now that awning thing, it's up to you. I'm going to leave it out. But did you notice when I zoomed in there, you probably see the little street lights. They're nice. You might want to put those in. It's up to you. I like the telegraph pole in the background. So I'll put the telegraph pole in. Always fun to paint those because they have these little cables, which will be fun. And I think we're now ready, literally ready now to paint. So this is where I will break. I will leave the image up on the screen, but I'll just pause the recording and see how you're doing before I go and have a cup of tea. Okay, so standard colors and neutral tint. If you don't have neutral tint, you could use lamp black, ivory black, Payne's grey, whichever darkening tone you prefer. You're going to need, for brushes, let's just see if I've got it here, as well as your usual brushes, a flat brush, if you do have one. If not, do the best with your mop, or your biggest brush. Now I'm going to use a hake brush like this, and I'm going to start with laying in the tones in the sky. And for that, I'm going to need to, if your paper is on a board, you can tilt it away from you. So imagine the bottom of the paper I'm lifting upwards, and I'll just put something underneath my board, like a book or a roll of masking tape, whatever you've got to hand, really. It so happens I've got some tape, so I'll just put that underneath, just to give my board a little bit of a tilt downwards, so that when I apply the washes for the sky, they're going to start to move upwards slightly. Sorry, downwards, but upwards into the sky. So the colors that I'm going to begin, I'm going to use 2 washes in the sky. So you'll need plenty of water because you'll need to fill the whole of this area. And literally the sky is behind all of the buildings, behind the trees, behind the bell tower. So everything gets the same wash, pretty much. But we're going to do a slight variation in the tones because we have a peachy tone, which is, I'm going to use this raw sienna, which is a yellowy tone, orangey yellow, and I'll make a tea mixture of that. But I'm going to add to it a small amount of pink. So I've got some permanent rose. If you don't have permanent rose, alizarin crimson or any crimson is better than cadmium red because it's transparent, and we want a transparent wash in the sky. So there's my warm area of the sky, and it's a very thin tea wash. You can see it's all pooling, because I've got my board at an angle, it's all pooling down to that corner, but that's okay. Maybe I can tilt that up a little bit. That's better. Now, at the same time as that wash goes on, I'll also be trying to juggle another color wash as well. So I take some of this over here because it's going to be the basis of both washes. But to this, I'm going to add a little bit of purple and a little bit of gray. So the purple is literally violet. So I just add, now be very careful not to add too much. Try a little bit and see what it does. And you'll see that because it's the opposite color on the spectrum, it will make your mixture go slightly gray. There you go. Now, depending on your violet, and also depending on your raw sienna as well, because there's raw sienna and violet in this, it might go one of three directions. It could go towards a brown gray, which if it does, then please add a little bit of blue. French ultramarine blue will balance that. But if it goes to a sort of purpley tone, great, you've got the color you want. If it goes red toned, then add a little bit of blue, like I've done. So I'm going to add a little bit of pink and a little bit of blue. And then you'll see I get this sort of lavender color gray, which is very nice. Right, so there we are. I'll just go through that again, just because that was quite quick. So raw sienna with a little bit of permanent rose. So you get this peachy color. Very nice indeed. And I took some of that color over here and I added a touch of violet, tiny touch, and I made a gray. Now, you've got to balance it towards a purple spectrum. So if it isn't violet, either add blue, which I did, a little bit of blue, and also a little bit of pink, till you feel that, yeah, that's a purpley gray. If it looks a red gray, then you need more blue. If it looks too like a blue gray, you need a little bit of pink. There we are. Hope that makes sense. Now, where do we begin this wash? Well, funnily enough, we're going to begin it at the bottom, at the water. So I'm going to put this wash in first, peachy colored wash. It is also the lightest color. And you'll notice what happens when I use my flat brush. If you've got a flat brush, you'll get a bead forming. And that bead means that this is alive, which is great. It means that my watercolor is behaving correctly. If it's running because your slope of your board is too steep, then I would encourage you to reduce the tilt on your board. So you want this little bead of color as it's going. And if you find, as you're putting your color on, you get these little spots where it won't color for whatever reason, just go back and forth over it. That, I believe, will be maybe if you're using skincare products on your hands, like skin cream, it can just cause like a little grease spot on the paper. So don't worry about it. Just be aware that you can go back and forth until it goes away. So in a way, this very light, you see how light this wash is? It's unifying the lights in the sky and the water reflection. Okay. Now, when you get to this point here, and hopefully you've got enough left, I'm going to go to a slight diagonal. Do you see that? Yeah. And I'm going to let this come through the bell tower windows. There we go. Because that's where my peachy color goes up to. And now I'm going to take this color into that color. And I'm going to add this wash at the top line, into the line. Don't go back into there, just add it in. And what's happening is we're making a gradation. And this time I want you to go very slowly. See what I'm doing? Very slowly. Adding a bit more of this purpley gray. each step of the way. And if it's running away from you, sometimes the color can do that, then my recommendation is tilt your board less steeply, and then it won't run so quickly. I'm going back in now with a little bit more of that purpley gray. And just check out the color if you like it, you know. If you didn't like it and you thought, well, it's not as purpley now, it looks more brown, and it'll still work, but you could add a touch of color. Even now, it would work. My purple there, a little bit of neutral tint. Just adding a little bit more color into my mix here. Maybe not as much as that. That would be better. And I'll just add a little bit more, just to push this a bit more. And as you can see, it's a bit stronger than that, probably too much because I added too much neutral tint. So what I can do is I clean my brush and dry it. And I can go back through. Because until this is dry, it's not the end. You know, I've still have a little bit more time. And then I'll leave that. I'll leave that for a moment to settle in. And I've got a nice pink glow, slightly graying to purples, which I'm kind of happy about now. And when I get to a point where I think, yeah, that's what I was after, or something similar, then I will just wait with a piece of paper towel to capture any drips that run off the page. So I just get a bit of paper towel. And that's a slight variegated sky. I've got two tones, a warm and a cool. And you can't even see the color on the water, but there is some there. It's my first tone. And I'm just waiting now. You see how it sort of pulls down here. Anything appears and I just mop it up like so. This part, you can't really rush. You just have to wait. Because even if you got a hairdryer out, which some people do, all it will do is give you blotches where you dry an area with too much color. Better to let gravity organize your painting. Now, things that commonly go wrong with a wash like this, a bug flies onto your page in the summer, which is a nightmare. A brush starts to have a problem, a bristle off the brush gets loose in your sky, or worse than that, several of them. That is a real problem. What I tend to do if that happens is I will take either a very fine brush or a point of my pencil and lift the hair off before it dries and hope it settles down. Because if you leave it, what happens is the color will pull around the bristle and you get a line like a worm in the sky, which looks terrible. And then another problem is a buckle. You get a buckle, like I've got a couple of buckles, and the water seems to want to sit in that corner. So that's why I am taking my paper towel and just very carefully draining any of those as they arrive on my tape. Now, I feel I've got a lovely gradated sky. And I'm going to give you a little bit of information about washes like this. Now, when you put in a wash like this, it's very wet. So we now have our paper is at its maximum, pretty much the maximum humidity. It's wet. So yeah, you have to wait till it gets to a point where it's starting to be not so wet. And then you can remove whatever book or whatever it is, and now it starts to settle down. But you have to be careful that it is indeed not so wet. Otherwise, the water can start to run back the way, and you don't want that. So I think I'm there, which is lucky for me. But if you touch your paper with the back of your finger, it should feel cold. Maybe not wet, but cold. And if it does feel, as I say, wet, not cold, then you can go into your next phase, which is, remember this tone of gray, you can pick this up and we can now start to bring that in. I would start maybe just there where the shadows are on your, yeah, just to see what it looks like. And it doesn't look too bad, does it? And what I want you to do is with this brush, your mop, start to look for these areas of ripples and reflections that I'm going to show you now. So here, 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 and should be another one here. Oh. So these go in while it's wet into wet. If I can find the pencil thing again. Another little ripple there. And what I tend to do is I will look at my picture and I'll just start to bring some ripples down. Now, hopefully your paper's still moist enough to allow this to happen. And these are very light tones, like so. I'm also going to put a little bit of it up here. But I'm going to stop when I get to here. This is sort of the boundary there. Because what happens there is we start to get a lighter sky above, and so we get lighter reflections in the water. But my paper is now beginning to find itself going from wet to moist and a little bit dry in places. So I can get a bit of dry brush effect. But you see, the thing is, at this stage, this color wash is so thin, it's like tea, even lighter maybe. It really can't cause a lot of problems, even if we go wrong. We're just putting some little ripples in, but notice my ripples are going vertically down. That's quite important. And there we are. So I've got some light spots, light spot, light spot, light spot, couple of little bits of light spot, but mostly it's all grey. Hope that helps, because we are now going into our next mixture. Now, it's not too tricky, the next mixture, but we're going to go same color, but a little bit stronger. And we are going to make a grey wash for pretty much the land area and unify that. So if we take neutral tint, it's not a bad color to begin with because it is grey. And I make it a little bit stronger, maybe like a coffee strength. And I'm going to add a small amount of raw sienna. The raw sienna shall warm this up, and now I have a warmer grey that I'm going to bring in from the end of the island and I'm going to start to literally paint a grey shape, a silhouette of grey. But where I'm not going to paint into, you probably guessed, is that light, bright line, which is that capping stone, if you recall. And I'm also not wanting to paint into the posts. So I'm just looking for a different brush. There we go. So I'm going to paint this grey shape like a silhouette going from one side of the island, the left, coming towards the right. Like so. Now, if you do make the mistake and you paint into one of your posts, don't worry about it too much. You can lift it out using a flat synthetic brush. But if you make a mistake, then generally carry on and try not to make another one. Now, or try to get focused on where it is that that mistake's happening and try not to allow it to disturb your paint flow. Now, they are, in my painting, I've got quite a few chairs and tables and things on this jetty. So I'm going to allow those areas to be reserved as lights because I'm not sure yet what I'm going to do with them until I've mapped in this grey as a shape around. But once I get around those chairs and things, what I'm going to do is I'm going to change the tone a little bit. Okay, so I'm going to pick up a little bit of, it could be burnt sienna, a bit of cad red, doesn't really matter, a red tone to make this grey into a brown grey. And I'm going to just put a little bit of this terracotta-y brown tone into the grey here and there in the background there. And then I'm going to move forward with it because this is the wall that is in front of the church, and it's bricks. So bricks have this kind of tone to them. So I'm bringing that forward and then carry that on into the building itself. Just making life easier, just to connect those grey red tones. And then I carry on again, like so. And there we are. Now, in front of that though, I clean my brush now, add a little bit more raw sienna, a little bit of neutral tints, same tones, You could literally use that gray at the edge there. It's the same tone. Because what I want to do is I want to, while it's still wet, unify this slightly yellow gray tone into that slightly lighter red area on the ground in front of the church building, like so. And that's pretty good, because that same color there, I'm going to now paint literally into the wall that supports the jetty. But I've got to be quick to remind you not to paint into that white line. That's reserved. It just so happens that below that wall, your posts can have that color because they don't have a raking side light. Why? Well, because the sun's not getting to that area. So there's no light. So it doesn't matter there. So that's good. Once I've done that there, I'll also do the same back there. So you'll notice what I'm doing is I'm doing it in phases. Instead of trying to paint the whole thing in one go, I'm allowing that white stripe of the quayside's capping stone to be a boundary to my areas of paint. And in that way, I don't have to panic and rush. This is a good strategy to look for natural boundaries in the painting, even though these are literally the same tone. It's a grey tone. This is a bit warmer, it has burnt sienna. This is a little bit cooler, it's got raw sienna. It's a boundary. And then what do? I just soften that edge where it meets the water. I do put a little bit of an ebb and a flow. Do you see that? A ripple. It's okay. I don't want to put a big ripple there because I want to keep that perspective feeling intact. But I do want to, every now and then, soften a few of these edges as it comes out, because the water does demand a different texture in places than the land, because it's not a solid. So we have to think along those kind of lines. Okay, I hope that's helping you so far. Let me know if you've got any problems with that part of the painting. So to recap, we put a wash in to the background, a variegated sort of grey purple tone and a peachy warm tone, which is a light middle value. And then on top of that, we've now put it's a coffee thickness. So we're going into our towards middle value. And now I'm going to connect this tone. Let me just explain what it is. It's neutral tint with a bit of raw sienna. It's coffee thickness, doesn't have to be too strong. I'll add a little bit of burnt sienna, that's the reddish brown. And I can paint into this area on the church. Now, when you're putting your colors in, if you want to add a bit more pink, or if you want to add a bit more orange, whatever you feel, it's your painting. And I'm going to unify this tone. I'm trying to get this tone similar value to what I did there. But notice I did break up the shapes into separate areas. You can do it. Would have been better if I'd have painted it all in one go. That's what I would do if I was not tied for time a little bit. But I'm going to do that now with my church. Now notice that the church bell tower has different tones within it. So I'm putting a middle value in now. It will get the darker tones later. But if I do feel that it gets a bit cooler, or, I can add a little bit of blue. Here's some cobalt teal. I can cool it down. As long as it's not too dark. I just added a bit of blue into there, cobalt teal. And that just gives me another aspect, sorry. Drink some tea. To that building. Here's another trick that you can do. You can use a piece of paper towel and you can squeeze your brush and you can lift a little bit to bring back in a little bit of light if you feel that certain areas has a bit less tone. Like on the right-hand side of this, seems to be the sunlight's bouncing in there a little bit. That's what I feel anyway. So there's my wash for the first part of the tower. Now I'm ready to go into my building here. Notice that this building has white stucco, and white stucco in this kind of light becomes sort of purpley. So again, I can just go straight to a purple as my purple color. Now, purple is a very dark color, so you have to thin it down with water. And I would suggest, because it's white stucco, make it tea wash, a tea wash. You'll know if you've got the right color, the right value. How will you know? Well, because it will look lighter than this tone here. So I'm putting my purple in there. In fact, I'll just put that purple all the way through that shape, all the way through it. Why not? Because it's the lightest tone in this building. And then I'll come back to it. Now, while I've still got this purpley tone, it is going to be quite useful, because if I now paint that purpley tone into my posts, I will have the right tone for the posts. What I like to do, though, is if the sun is in the right-hand side, I'll leave a little bit of light on the right-hand side of my post. Of course, if the sun was in the left, I would do the same to leave a little bit of light on the left-hand side. But most of these posts have a little bit of tone to begin with. So if I zoom in, you'll see what I mean. So I've left a little bit of light on the side of the post. We call that rim lighting, and that will, or side lighting, as some people call it as well, which is the old name for it. Side lighting, rim lighting, same thing. Okay, and while I've still got this zoomed in, I'm also going to do something else. While I've still got this is the same purple tone as I put on the building. You can see that, there it is. And I'm just going to bring that across the ground here. I'm going to put a shadow, this very soft, diffuse shadow. And it's kind of coming from the side, like so. I just put a little bit here and there. And I'm also going to paint that into the furniture on the walkway here, the chairs and the tables. But notice what I did? I've left a little bit of light on the rim, or the upper surface of the chair. I'm leaving a little bit of light. But now my chairs seem to be located on the ground plane now. A little bit of purple. Notice it's stretching there. Now, where is that on the picture? Well, it's here. You can just about see it. It's like a little shadow coming across. In this kind of light, you don't get a very pronounced shadow, but it may still be there. So look for it. And because it's cast from this building, I like to then put it all over the building that's casting it. So it gives me a bit more depth. It's not essential, but it helps. There we go. A little bit of texture as well. That's not a bad thing. So I'll zoom back out now because we're moving through this very well now. And we'll look at the next area. So the next area that really needs our help are the trees. So everywhere gets this first wash, and then we'll go into details. Now with the trees, we might just get lucky. What I mean by that is we might be able to paint the tree in one go. It's possible. So the trees are pretty much green, so whichever green you prefer. I'm going to use a warm green in these trees and a cooler green over here. So I'm going to mix two green tones. So I just mix literally neutral tint into there till I get a middle value. So it's coffee thickness, a little bit stronger than the tea. And my trick for this is you could use a sable brush. It's probably better for this actually. Pick up the paint and just splay the brush a little bit. You see that? It's not good for the brush, but if you do a little bit of it, it won't hurt too much. And you see what I'm doing? Creating dry brush marks. Now, it's not necessary to do that if you can do dry brush really well otherwise. So dry brush, you just use the side of your brush and you just go like that. You see I've got a tree. Nothing too difficult. When it goes wrong because people use the tip of their brush. Now, I was always taught if you hold the brush like this is called maestro grip. Great, isn't it? So you can now do maestro grip. And you just use the side of your brush and look what it does. It creates trees. Now, it might be a little bit boring if you use the same color, so add a bit of orange to your green. And lo and behold, suddenly you've got a warmth, an atmosphere within those shadowy shapes. Now, admittedly, it is a bit awkward painting in those little windows shapes, but take your time. And if you find that this brush is too big, there's no reason why you can't move downwards in scale to a smaller brush. And there we go. Now, I did mention I was going to use another color, cooler green over here. So for that, I've got Viridian, which is my favorite green. It's a nightmare green, by the way, because no trees really look that color. Very few anyway. So if we now add neutral tint to it, it's going to be a tremendous color. It's going to be, look at that. And you can now have a bit of fun anchoring these. It'll look dark. And it is dark, isn't it? I'm using a little bit of the side maestro grip and a little bit of a broken, point to my brush. I like it a bit scruffy for the tree. And my sort of recommendation is kind of print a little bit, as if it's a printing tool. Let it push down and move your arm around and your hand around till you get the feeling of where you want that shape to be. You're going to print this shape or paint it, whatever you feel. And then as I move this tree into the next tree, I might just paint half of it with the cool tone. And you probably guessed, I'm going to add orange to that color. There's some orange. And now I print that in, and as I touch that color in, look, I get this beautiful transition of cool into warm. And I just like those contrasting aspects. And then I'll paint a little bit of that into the shadowy bits. You can see it's a little bit darker. If you painted the street lights in or drew the street lights in, by the way, well done. You'll have to paint around them now. I didn't, so I'm just carrying on. But look, it's starting to happen, isn't it? I've got my trees, and there's no point in rushing that. You just have a bit of fun. And what you'll notice as you build up these trees, because there's different layers of depth in the wood. Now I've got that beautiful feel to the trees in the background. My other buildings look a bit light again, don't they, by the contrast? That's absolutely natural. Don't worry about it, because what that's going to do is that's going to now give us the instruction really for the next wash. But before I do that, there is a little bit I need to do in the background. Now, in the background there, we have the horizon, and what you can see in the distance is, I believe that is Burano. So I'm going to put a little bit of tone. Now, it looks very dark in the photograph because it's contrasting with the horizon, which is the brightest part of the painting, the sky. So what we shouldn't do is paint that as dark as we sense it to be. So whatever color you've got on your brush, maybe a gray with a little bit of pink, just test it first, and you'll know if it's the right tone. It's got to be lighter than the tone that you're going to have at the wall. Okay. So I'm just going to paint that across. And it's the other island that you can see in the distance. And there it is. So I've got it. I can also paint a little bit of that tone on those. Don't really know what they're called, to be honest, but there's some kind of like a little lighthouse thing. And that looks good. Starting to feel like it's connecting, isn't it? Right. So where to next? Well, it depends where you want to go next, really. I think I'm going to go to this building because I can see that the roof needs to be slightly more warm and slightly darker than the stucco. The stucco is fine, but this needs to be grayer and redder. So I'll add neutral tints, coffee thickness again, a little bit of cadmium red, which is a really good way of getting a sort of terracotta-y grey brown. I'm just going to paint that shape on the top. Looks good. Complete the shape. And on the other side. Of the roof eave. And you can also, if you've got a steady hand, put those little lines of detail. We don't have to come back then. Like so. I'm also going to put that color into the doors and the windows because they fit the tonal scheme there. I can go over it with a darker tone later, but it's like when you're drawing, the more you proceed in your drawing, i.e. you've got more information, you've got more things to then compare as a comparison for your next move. So if I just put this tone in there, okay, it might need to go darker, I'm sure it will. But for now, it gives me a better indication about the overall tonal feel to this painting. And I think it's starting to go where I want it to go. I'm also noticing this reddish grey tone is also within the underside here along the jetty. So if I paint a little bit of this along the underside now, I've got to be careful when I'm doing this because the land is meeting the ground. Sorry, the land is meeting the water. And if you get too preoccupied, which I often do, with painting a flat shape, I will miss an opportunity. So I use these posts as a natural boundary to soften the edge just like we did in the first wash, and tease a little ripple out into the water here and there, but nothing too much. Don't force that, you know, just a little bit to make it feel like it's naturally there. And then I carry on past the next post. But I want to explain that the post on the left-hand side can have that tone, this reddish, the same color you had on the roof, can go on the left-hand side of your post. That makes sense, because it's the shadow tone on the post, or part of it, because the post will more than likely go from light to mids to shadow. So this will be moving towards the shadow. It's a mid-tone really, but it may well be enough in the distance for the effect. So let's remember how to make it. It's neutral tint, a little bit of cad red, and you'll get this grey-brown tone, or just really a warm grey. Now, this is why neutral tint is such a good color to have in your toolbox, because as the name suggests, neutral tint is a neutral tone. It shouldn't really have any temperature or color. So you can make it warm or cool just by adding a little bit of red to warm it, or a little bit of blue to cool it. And that's really what I'm doing. But as I say, I move along, I paint the post shadow, or what I'm interpreting as the shadow of the post for now. And then I only go so far, and then I soften the edges where it meets the water and put a little ripple out there here and there. You can have a little bit of fun. Now, these ripples that I'm doing, they go horizontally like a little zigzag, but don't point them too severely. They don't want to point down at that angle. They're mostly at what I would call, if you notice, especially on this area, they're kind of moving with the direction of the water tide, the tide of the water. So in this moment, we're seeing the photograph, these diagonal waves are literally 14 minutes to the hour. 14 minutes past the hour. So keep your ebbs and flow gently describing what the condition is that we're seeing the water. Sure, that we will paint at some point water that's moving with more gusto, but for now, we're just doing a tranquil setting. So there we go. And you see, I'm starting to get a feeling now of depth in the painting, probably for the first time. Putting the shadow tone on the the left-hand side of the post. Now, as I said, it's going where the shadow tone is and the middle tone. It's probably half of the post. There will be a darker tone, but for now, that's enough. And then as I come to here, the foreground area of the jetty, I fill this space as well. I might leave a little bit of that previous color in places on the posts, in some of the posts, probably about halfway down, a little bit of light gets to it. And then, like I say, as I move forward, I will soften that tone as it tips its toes into the water. Okay. So I clean my brush. You probably don't see this, but off of camera, I've got a towel, and I just dip my brush on there to take away some of the moisture. And then I can, do you see that? I can introduce a few more ebbs. And I just make them up as I go along, because I can now because I've got a momentum in the brush stroke. It's going one direction. You see that? You can bring that down. Look, you can make them go a little bit further back because water moves in a gentle sort of way in these conditions. So you get a bit of toing and throwing. Hope that is clear. But notice I allow very few of these to continue through the, this space that I'd allowed the light to come through, these little channels of reflection of the light. So be mindful of where you're putting these as you go. So I'm starting to introduce reflections. So it's cad red, neutral tint. It's just a warm gray. That's all it is. Now, whenever you're doing a mix of a color, it's very difficult to get it exactly the same again. So just test it in a place just to see. And if it's too strong, add a bit of water and then try again. And a little trick around that dilemma of getting the mix to flow into the previous, you can just go back a bit and let the new mix filter into the old mix a little bit, and that's fine. You see, it just gives me more depth again. So after a while, when you're confident enough to know these tricks, what it is we are actually okay to put any color into any previous color. It's not a problem, as long as we don't introduce water. And the way you introduce water, of course, is you make your mix too thin. So the process that we're following is we gradually get a stronger mix each time. And because we're getting a gradually stronger mix each time, we're not going to have blooms. We're not going to get our painting out of control. That's not going to happen. And I just, soften this edge here and there. Remember this bit, it's very important. I've got that straight line, but I just want to soften. So I clean my brush, dry my brush a little bit, and then I just soften that edge so it just melts into the reflection. You want it to melt. And then I pick up a bit of the color, and you probably guess what I'm going to do, because I just do the same thing every time. A few zigzags here and there. 14 minutes passed, into the water, and it starts to also already feel like water. That's what it feels like. And we are painting water reflections, literally using perspective to guide us. There we go. Now, you probably noticed that now we've got this reflection over, we're looking a little bit barren over here. It doesn't look so, what's going on? So over there, we do have a gray, but it's not warm tones. They're cooler. So I'm going to add a little bit of neutral tint to another well and add some blue. Doesn't matter which blue. This time I added a bit of cobalt blue, but any blue will do. And I think a little bit of green, just because, or turquoise, whichever, a little bit of green, because the water has green notes in the Adriatic. And I'm adding a bit of water to thin it down to tea wash, because what I want to do is I just want to see if I can test to see how it looks at the edge here. It's a bit strong. So now I've tested it, I add a bit more water to it. That's better. And I'm just going to float a few reflections into my painting, which are, well, that's the trees. And then I clean my brush, dry my brush, and I just let these tones melt away into the painting. So if your bucket of water is heavily polluted with color, you won't be able to thin the color down. So you'll need to change your bucket of water. That does happen. But if you've got a big bucket like I've got here, you'll get away with it. So there we are. So I've added a little bit of tone here and there. Just to balance this effect over here. And I will pick up a couple of the other color, a brush stroke of the other color as well. And I'll just do, see that? A couple of waves here and there, especially in the foreground area, that seem to have escaped from the other area. And that will do. I don't think you need to overdo this, because it's a small painting, and remember when we paint a watercolor, it is a model. It's a model of a bigger scene, the world. We can't put every wave in, that's obvious. So we don't, okay? We don't even try. We just do a simplified version. Okay, so far so good. We're doing okay, I think. Now we can go in to the next wash on the church tower, the last wash, and on the wall here. It's no longer looking as dark as it once did, because the tree was so dark, and needs to be, because we find the contrast with the sky. So how are we going to do that then? How are we going to get these darker middle values on top of the church? Well, we increase the thickness of the paint, so more neutral tint. This time I am going to perhaps creamy, milky, creamy thickness. It's still a warm tone, surprisingly, so I'll add a little bit of red. And I'm going to start by putting a few little lines on the church steeple for the cross. And then be very careful as you paint into your triangular shape. I leave a little bit of that underpainting middle value on the right, so the light's coming in. And then I just paint downwards to that point. And then I'll paint outwards to that point. And then downwards to that point. Now, as I've gone down, what happens is we start to optically seem to feel that it gets a little bit less intense, that dark. So what I'll do then is I'll just add either a little bit of that grey tone I had there, which will definitely thin the color down, or I could add a little bit of water. Because as long as I don't introduce this thinner mixture into that thicker mixture, it won't bloom. So I can go thinner as I go down, you see, and this is called overglazing. So we're glazing now. We're putting a glaze on top of the church. And you can see I'm painting around the bell tower, allowing the light to cut through. Looks good. I'm leaving a little bit of the light on the right-hand side. And then as I come down here, I see a sort of a shadowy tone on the left-hand side coming all the way down. Like so. That looks good. And then I'm going to clean my brush, dry my brush, and then I'm going to do this. I'm going to lead a little bit of that color. And what I'm doing here is I'm using that glaze that I've put in, and I'm just drawing it out. And this is kind of like running in. So what I do here is I am taking a bit of the color there and just allowing it to move over into the lighter tone. And that really gives you a feeling then of more, well, hopefully, more depth to the church. You just got to be careful you don't lift any color out. That's one of the dangers. But and then once you've settled on your tone, leave well alone, because if you keep painting like that, you will damage. It's called fiddling. You don't want to do that. Right. I'll take a bit of that darker tone as well, and I'm going to put it on the roof here because that's darker as well. And here. These are the eaves. They just need a bit more tone. I'll also put a bit of that darker tone on the inside angle of the arch. I'll paint it over my doors again. So my doors did get another hit of color and they look good. And onto the windows, why not? Just a little bit extra. But I always leave a little bit of the underpainting to show. Just gives it a bit more depth. And while I've still got this tone on my brush, what I'm going to do is I'm going to take it all the way down the island to the end where the wall began. And remember I said to you, you don't necessarily need to paint to draw what you're going to paint. So if I use a rigger brush, which is a long thin one, I can take this color and I can now paint my trees, the trunks in silhouette. Like so, and join those to that shadowy shape at the base, and then bring this forward gradually. Now, as I bring this forward, hopefully you've had enough time to do those. A couple of little branches. You might, while you've got your rigger brush, you can have fun with this, painting branch shapes anywhere where you've left little windows, opportunities for your trees to have a bit more fun. Always works. Oh, and you can do that post. Remember the post if you did the telegraph post? Be quick when you're doing the cables. So that's fun. A quick arc like that with your wrist. And we're now moving from the end of the island there, where these contrasts kind of meet. You notice how the tree contrasts here, quite dark, and the wall is a similar tone. Paint that dark until you reach the posts. You know these posts in the water, and as they meet that post, paint around them, and you'll reserve the light in the post, because that's called the counter change. So if I zoom in now, you'll see what I mean. Hopefully you don't really need to see the mix because it's still that reddish neutral tint mix. The same one. So as I now paint along the wall, bottom of the wall, the top of the wall, and my trick is to gradually, as I move forward, let it get a little bit lighter. So you could add a tiny touch of water into your mix so that the glaze gets thinner. See, it's thinner there than it is over there. Because what happens is, as the aerial light or the atmospheric light bounces along the wall, the closer it gets to us, i.e. by here, it's going to be much lighter in tone than those greys back there. So if I add a little bit of water to it as I move, takes a little bit of dexterity, but it's not without where we're not without these skills now, so we can do that. And then gradually, you see my post now, look at it, it's popping out in front. And I'll bring this down all the way to this building. I've seen artists when they're doing walls and things like that, starting to put textures into the wall. I'm not really that fussed with that, but I'll just bring this to its conclusion here. And then I review it and see if my tones are now looking together. I feel it's much better down there. You could go darker, it's true, but I don't think I'm going to. I think I got what I wanted there, but I just want to soften the edge where the bottom of the wall meets the walkway. So how do you do that? You clean your brush, you dry your brush on your towel, and then you just tickle the edge with the damp brush where it meets the walkway. Excuse me, but you've got to be very careful that you don't lift the paint off. That's easy to do. So when I say tickle, I really mean it's a very gentle sort of, it's not your uncle's tickle, you know, when you were little and your uncle put you on his knee and he tickled you and it hurt your ribs. Not that tickle, a very gentle, at least my uncle did. There we go. So you kind of tickle that edge and look at the depth now. It's amazing that these tiny little, you know, subtle things help massively. Right, so now I zoom out because I think I'm there. I just need a bit more depth here because to pull this forward, it has to be slightly darker than what's behind. So now we go into the dark accent. So for the dark accent, very close to the end of the painting now. What you need to make sure with the dark accent is all your middle values and your dark middle values are where you want them right now. And I think they're okay. I mean, I dare say now I've done the wall, I could go a little bit darker there. So I probably will probably put a bit more tone there, but over all of it. And you see what it did? It just did what I needed it to do. So this is the point of the painting where you just make sure everything is corresponding with each other and you're happy with that. Like, for example, here, how can that wall color be that tone and that be the same if this is at the side? So what I would do is I just glaze a bit more tone on that side. And you see what it did? Gave me more depth. So I've just played with a few values and then I'm ready now to go with the darker tone in this area here. So for that, it's just neutral tint. You won't see any color really, or very little. So neutral tint will do. And this is creamy thickness. I'll put some on the post here. You see that? Look what it does. And I'll put some on the key side where the post is leaning. That's good. And then a little bit here. Maybe a little bit on the post as well here as it sort of steps into the water. That's not a bad thing. And then here and here, but notice what I'm doing. I'm kind of doing maybe 2/3 of the way down only. And it's a kind of a quick sort of mark. And then I clean my brush, tap it, and this time I'm going to soften the upside edge. So this is the edge that, see that? And this one. So this time I'm drawing the color up the key side. Like so, which is nice. See that trapped little bit of light there is wonderful, isn't it? So your posts are now getting a little bit darker, maybe a little bit more tone up there, but not a lot. Just enough to make them step forward a bit. Yeah, there was a post. I missed that post. Oh dear. Oh well. I was going to put another post in, but I forgot. It doesn't matter. It just makes life easier, I guess. And then into the water, one more layer of tone here. And this has to be very thin, not too much. And it's got to be exactly vertical or close to as you go. So you like that? Isn't that fun when you put those in? And then just soften the edge of the ebb and the flow where it meets the water, that shadow. So I just clean my brush and I just soften a few of those here and there. You will gain the skill of knowing when to stop, but of course, as you get into watercolors and you do more and more of it, I dare say you're going to find new tricks of making that work the way you want it. So this is just an introduction really to getting your watercolors to show that sort of space, that mood. There's obviously more we can do, but I think that's sufficient to explain where we're at. I would like to put a few shadows under my chairs because I put some chairs and tables in. So I just put a few little legs and a shadow under the chairs, like so, and soften those as well. Everything really now depends on edge quality, which is the hardest in some ways, or the most difficult principle in watercolors to really understand. And it really swings mostly from understanding the direction of light and what the textures of the substance that you're painting is meeting. So for example, this is a diffused light situation. So the edge quality is usually very soft. When you have raking sunshine, then maybe you'll get a harder edge occurring on a shadow. But even then, the shadow might then go soft as well on certain areas. But I hope you've enjoyed this one. It's been fun. We have just painted Mazzorbo, and I'm just putting a few extra little bits here and there. But other than that, I think I've got what I wanted. So it's always a danger if you do too much that you overstay your welcome in your own painting, you know. So there we are. What fun. So I'm going to stop the recording there.